Human rights lawyers are arguing that the fate of asylum seekers during lockdown is unclear. They say expired visas pose further challenges as allegations have surfaced that some asylum seekers were instructed by their employers to go on unpaid leave until their visas were renewed. Jacquie Cassette is the director and national practice head of the Cliff Decker Hofmeyer Pro Bono and Human Rights Practice. She joins me now for more on this. Good evening, Jacquie, and thank you so much for your time. Firstly, just explain what the problem is here.
Good evening, Kathy, and thanks very much for giving us an opportunity to speak on this issue. Kathy, I think the problem really lies in the fact that no directives have been issued by the Department of Home Affairs regulating the conditions or the situation of asylum seekers whose permits will expire during the course of the lockdown. What they have done is provided an announcement, and also they have, on the 14th, just this Monday, they then issued a media statement in which they basically said that they will not be penalizing any asylum seekers or arresting any asylum seekers whose permits have expired or will expire during the course of the lockdown. The concern is that we don't think this announcement has any legal effect and so we're also unclear as to how widely this announcement has been publicized within state entities. So are the police aware of this particular announcement, for example? Are the public health services aware of this announcement? Asylum seekers are arguably one of the most vulnerable populations in our country, and they depend on that piece of paper, that Section 22 permit that they have. It's effectively their passport to a lawful existence within South Africa and their ability to access bank accounts, jobs, education, and protection against unlawful arrest and deportation.
So Jacquie, if I hear you correctly, are you saying that asylum seekers would not be afforded the same privilege that many South Africans would have if perhaps you're found with an expired license disc that has expired during this time, or any other services which we know have been suspended during this lockdown period?
It does seem that that may be the case, Kathy, in law. What we do know is that, so the minister has, for example, he has in fact issued directives under the Act, the Minister of Home Affairs. And he has, for example, dealt with the situation of those people in South Africa who are on temporary visas, for example, which may expire while they are here during the lockdown. And he's basically said that those people will be able to apply to have those visas extended, and in the directives they make provision for the ways in which these people will be accommodated. Yet the same directives do not deal with the situation of asylum seekers. So all asylum seekers have is the good word and the announcement of the minister. There is provision being made by the ministry to cater for people, for example, who need birth certificates or whose identity documents, citizens whose identity documents do expire. But you know, citizens in this country are so much less vulnerable than asylum seekers are, and as I said, without a valid permit, an asylum seeker can virtually access very few services, and they are very, very vulnerable.
Sure. Even
though they potentially, you know, the law does afford them certain rights to medical care, for example, even if they don't have a permit. On the ground, in the hospitals and in the clinics, most asylum seekers very often are denied services if they do not have a valid permit.
Let's speak about what the experience then has been of those who have had their papers expired during this time. Do you have cases of people that have been marginalized or disenfranchised as a result of this?
We've certainly heard via our partner organizations on the grounds that, for example, people whose permits have expired have been advised that they need to go back home and that they're not allowed to come back to work, and effectively, you know, it's unclear whether they've been fired, but basically their employment has been placed in jeopardy, and they've been told that it's only when they have a valid permit that they can come back to work. We do know we've in fact been approached ourselves, our firm, by an employer who employs asylum seekers and who wanted to apply for those asylum seekers to gain benefits in terms of the temporary unemployment insurance benefit, and has claimed that they've been unable to do so because of the asylum seeker status of asylum seekers and who don't have valid permits. So we know of people, asylum seekers, whose bank accounts have been frozen because in terms of FICA, the banks are required to have valid forms of identification for all of their clients. So we know that there are already consequences. I've heard stories certainly of asylum seekers who have been unable to access social assistance, for example, getting food parcels. So yes, the impact is certainly being felt by people in the country. And I think what's important just to point out, Kathy, is that it's not just the vulnerability of this particular population and the fact that as a constitutional democracy, we have constitutional obligations to protect these people. But the ramifications for society as a whole are huge. Right now, you know, there's a call for us to have a unified response to fighting COVID-19 and to coming together and to working together as a nation. And, you know, the health consequences for our population at large are going to be massive if you, for example, have a vulnerable community who is struggling to get health services, to be tested if they are symptomatic. So, and the social dislocation, you know, the consequences of that will be massive, not just for the asylum seekers themselves, but for our whole population.
All right, Jacquie, thank you so much for bringing us into the picture there. Jacquie Cassette, she, of course, is the Director and National Practice Head of the Cliff Decker Hofmeyr Pro Bono and Human Rights Practice. We're going to take